This is my capstone project. My name is Brittany Weaver. I teach at Gilmore Lane Elementary. I am the kindergarten, first, and second grade self-contained ECE teacher. There are 2 ECE units at Gilmore Lane. There's my unit, and then there is the 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade unit. We both have 10 students in each unit, and then we have 2 resource teachers who push in and collaborate with regular education teachers. Gilmore Lane Elementary is a Title I school with a transient student base and 90% free and reduced lunch recipients. We have approximately 300 students. 15% of those students are special education, so that falls into the 2 units we have, and then the resource teachers. 17% Hispanic, 35% Caucasian, and 43% African American. The results of the 2016 K-Prep for proficient and distinguished scores for reading was 34%, writing 16%, math 21%, and social studies 21%. We used the 2016 K-Prep scores because when this was written, the 2017-18 ones were not released yet. This is my plan and my timeline. So the first column you're going to see is for the fall. I added January into the fall because January, my plan for January kind of reviews from what we did before break and starts off there when we come back after break. So this first column, you have November is the first group. November was where we began gathering our test scores. We used our MAP test scores from the fall, and during our all-day planning, where we have one day and we all sit down and plan together, we took part of the time to fill in our MAP test scores. So we did the first column, we did the fall, and then we'll meet again when the winter scores are finalized and add those in, and then again at the end of the year and add in the spring scores. So we'll be able to look at the fall, winter, and spring all next to each other. And this is for our focus is the ECET. We I wanted to mainly focus on the ECET first, and then take what we've done and implemented that with the whole school after this plan. So that would be like a whole nother plan. Also in November, I sent out a teacher survey, and again, this is just to the ECE team, of what assessments they are currently using in their classroom for ELA, specifically reading. And then we did a training in the CTOP, the comprehensive test for phonological processing. That is an assessment that I learned throughout this program. I learned in our advanced assessments course, and then actually purchased the book and the CD and the testing booklets that go along with it. So it's something that a resource we already had, and then I was able to use my knowledge to train my colleagues in how to do it and kind of guide them through that. And then I was able to coach my partner teacher, my colleague, for the 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade unit, and use my knowledge of a coaching cycle to work with her on implementing and using the CTOP for one of her students, which leads me to December. So in December, the goal was for each ECE teacher to implement the CTOP with 1 student, kind of reflect on how that went, what they thought about it, did they like it, did they find it useful, the results helpful, kind of all those things. So I did a reflection conversation with my colleague who I did the coaching cycle with when implementing the assessment, and we kind of reflected on how she thought it went. She really, really liked the information that it gave out, but thought it was, time consuming for her to sit down and do with every single one of her students. So kind of looking at where she could go from there to implement that with all of her students, but like when is the best time? Because when you do your running records, it's more so during your guided reading groups, but this test is a little more lengthy. So just finding a time that works best for her. And then in December, which we are beginning here And our next PLC would be a book study on Common Formative Assessment book. This is also a text that I was introduced to. It was one of our texts in this assessments class. And I found it very, very resourceful and useful. So we're going to sit down as a team and kind of feed through it, pull out the important parts, do a book study on that. And that'll take course over the next couple of months. So then when we come back in January, it will be kind of a review of everything we've done. I'll follow back up on the coaching cycle with my colleague, and we will look at where she is, what support she needs, and then we will continue to do a book study on this text. Then we're looking at the spring. Again, I tied January into the fall just because it was kind of a review of what we were doing. But the new things we will do it in the spring. In February, we will gather the MAP test scores for the winter and sit down and add those into our data chart. And we will look at the growth. Obviously, we're expecting some growth because our students, they're learning, and we would like to see growth there. But we haven't really implemented the assessment, the CTOP, to drive our instruction. So we're hoping once that gets implemented to drive instruction, whether that's by the end of the year or even next year, that when we take the map after that and look at over the whole course of it, did adding in these assessments help our students grow as readers? So we will add those in, and then we will finish up our book study on Common Formative Assessment. Then going into March, after we've done our entire book study, looked at that formative assessment, the important factors, each teacher will create one teacher-made assessment. And this could be what they're teaching in their class. This could be a variety of things. So it would ideally tie into what they're teaching their direct students, but we may be able to use each other. So not only is every person creating one, we could come out of this with 4 or 5 assessments that each person can use. And that knowledge will come from the book study we had just completed. And then in April, and this kind of goes into May too, because I know some of the spring assessments may not be done yet. But once this MAP spring assessments are done, our testing is done, we will add those scores into our charts, and this could be over the summer. Again, it just timeline wise matters when the scores come back. And we will look at what growth we saw, and if we didn't see any growth, and that would be a good factor too, because our next step is going to be taking this plan of assessment, adding in these assessments, and using these assessments to drive instruction. And that's where we will begin looking at Jan Richardson's The Next Step Forward in Reading Intervention. And that is really important because our school as a whole has a literacy team, and they had a plan for a book study on Jan Richardson's guided reading. Next steps in guided reading. So this takes it a step further and adds in the next step forward in reading intervention. So we're going to look at that as an ECE team and do a book study on that, and that'll help us tie in those assessments to drive our interventions for our students. And ideally, I would like to look at it and then book study with it, and then take it out into the grade level teams and introduce it to the whole school as a whole to improve our reading instruction. But I think it's very, very important to tie it in with the ECE team first, get, us read through it, do our book study, find what we find important, and then implement that into our instruction, then take our knowledge out into the team. So that's kind of an idea of where I would like us to be. So that leads me to the implementation process. Right now, our whole school is using MAP data to drive instruction, which is great. So they meet at our weekly PLCs, start on Wednesdays, and they look at that when the data comes back, and they group their students based on that, which is amazing. But our struggle, which leads me to our concerns, is when I gave out the survey for all teachers, or for ECE teachers, our concern was that the MAP, grouping our students based off MAP, was not effective because some of our students weren't trying their best. Some of our students were looking off and guessing, but getting them right. So was it really, really, truly effective in instruction? And that was one of my concerns as well. But that's the main concern I got back on these surveys. So we gathered up the data. All of our students, if not all of our students, fell below the 20th percentile. A lot of mine actually fell closer to the first percentile, and it's very concerning. So I wanted to take it, where can we go from here to assess our students and group our students to drive our instruction to make sure they're getting what they needed, because based off just map alone, that's not driving their instruction in an appropriate way, because what if they're guessing? It's just a whole factor of, we don't feel that it was driving our students' instruction to exactly where they need to be. So I particularly wanted to get assessments that would help us drive our instruction and hone in on what skill our students need, and then group our students based off of that. Because we work with three different grade levels. So saying I'm going to put all my kindergartners here, my first graders here, and my second graders here is not fully effective, because some of my second graders might be on a kindergarten level, or they might be working on blending words. Well, some of my kindergartners are working on letter ID, and just all over the place. So grouping them based off map, and that was not effective to me. So we looked at the CTOP, the comprehensive test of phonological processing. And this is one that, again, I learned throughout this program. I've used on a student, but didn't really take it further, and I used it to practice when we were learning about it in my course, but I didn't take it that step further like I wish I would have. So I already have the book, I already have the CD, the test booklets, every piece that goes with it. So we did a training on that and have implemented it on one student, and then used a reflection conversation, which was part of the coaching cycle, and talked about it with my colleague and reflected in and on it, and how we really, really like the data that it provides, but when is it appropriate time? Do we block off a week to sit down and knock these out at the beginning, middle, and end of the year? Like, kind of looking at that piece. Like, when is an appropriate time to implement this? Upcoming in the implementation process, so beginning this month in December, we will do a book study on common formative assessment. Then in from January, February, March, we will continue this book study, and then we will create and implement one assessment based off of the knowledge we have learned from this text. And then, of course, the coaching cycle will continue on with myself and my colleague. Then in April to May and through the summer into next year, we'd like to begin looking at Jan Richardson's The Next Step Forward in Reading Intervention. And I think this really will help us build that gap, and then tie in our assessment to our guided reading and how we can use these assessments to drive our instruction. So overall, what we learned, my colleagues learned the importance of assessments to drive instruction, and they will instruction, and then they will continue to learn how to use various assessments to drive instruction. The students, you kind of think, well, what are my students learning out of this? But they are, because they learned the importance of tests and how it helps them to become better readers. So we talked about test-taking strategies and trying our best. Teachers aren't just giving tests to be giving tests. They're giving tests to help our students or them become better readers and learn. And then myself, I learned what it takes to be a leader. I learned how to advocate on behalf of my students, stepping up and saying, hey, this map testing is not effective for grouping my students. What is something we can do? And then kind of building this plan based off of that. And then stepping out of my comfort zone benefits my students, colleagues, and myself. Sorry, what am I? And then, being held accountable for these assessments, because we can train and preach and use, but if they're not held accountable for using or looking at the data, then are teachers really going to use them? Next steps for my professional self. I would like to research and understand more assessments. So beyond the CTOP and some of the ones we've looked at, what are some more we could use in our classroom? I want to begin my doctorate program within the next year, but I want to take a little break. Take a little breather, regather my thoughts, and then get into it and give it my all. I've had really tough semester with some personal life issues, but also I've had a really challenging class. So just kind of finish out the year strong with my classroom, and then over the summer start looking at doctorate programs and where I want to go from here. And then I would like to develop and present one professional development session. These are my references. Thank you, guys.